Deep, cinematic tone begins. Sounds of distant ocean waves, slowly replaced by the faint hum of aircraft engines. They say the ocean remembers everything. Every drop of water holds the memory of ships that sank, of men who fought, and of fire that once touched its waves. And if you listen closely, beneath the calm blue of Truk Lagoon, you can still hear it. The echo of explosions, the crackle of burning metal, and the voices of men who never came back. It was February 1944. The Pacific War had reached its boiling point. The United States Navy had already torn through the outer ring of Japanese defenses, and the Empire of Japan was bleeding, desperate, but still defiant. Far from the mainland, hidden deep in the Carolines, was Truk Lagoon, a massive coral atoll, surrounded by turquoise water so clear it looked like glass. For centuries, it had been paradise, palm trees, reefs, quiet villages. But now, it had become something else, the beating heart of the Japanese Navy. Inside its calm waters, Japan had built a fortress. Massive airfields lined the islands. Anchored within the lagoon were more than 60 warships, cruisers, destroyers, tankers, and supply vessels. Hundreds of aircraft sat on the runways, waiting for orders. It was the Japanese Pearl Harbor, their hidden stronghold in the middle of the ocean. But on the other side of the Pacific, in a cold and dimly lit war room, American intelligence had already discovered the secret. Aerial photos, intercepted messages, and reconnaissance reports painted a clear picture. Truk was no longer invisible, and the Americans were about to strike harder than ever before. They called it Operation Hailstone, a name chosen not just for the attack, but for the fury it carried, because what was about to fall from the sky wasn't rain, it was fire. The mission was massive. Task Force 58, one of the most powerful naval groups ever assembled, was ordered to unleash a full-scale assault. 5 aircraft carriers, 4 light carriers, 7 battleships, a dozen cruisers, and over 60 destroyers sailed toward Truk in silence. Their decks were filled with bombers and torpedo planes, Avengers, Hellcats, dauntless dive bombers, each loaded with destruction. On the evening of February 16, 1944, the American fleet reached its striking range. The ocean was dark, silent. Sailors whispered prayers as engines roared to life. Pilots climbed into cockpits, their faces lit only by the faint glow of instrument panels. Orders were given, radios clicked, and then, the night sky came alive. Hundreds of planes lifted off the decks, one after another, their engines tearing through the silence of the Pacific. From the distance, the islands of Truk were still sleeping, unaware that hell was coming. At dawn, the first wave reached the lagoon. The sun rose behind them, painting the clouds in gold and blood-red hues. And then, the bombing began. The first explosions hit the airfields. Japanese planes, parked wing to wing, went up in flames instantly. Fire spread across the runways. Fuel tanks burst like volcanoes, sending pillars of fire hundreds of feet high. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire in panic, black clouds of flak filled the sky, but the American bombers kept coming, wave after wave. The sound was deafening, the scream of diving planes, the thunder of bombs, and beneath it all, the cries of sailors running for their lives. Within the first hour, the Japanese air defense was shattered. Most of their aircraft were destroyed before they could even take off. And then the American pilots turned their sights to the ships below. From above, Truk Lagoon looked like a maze of steel and smoke. Japanese cruisers and destroyers tried to maneuver through narrow channels, but there was nowhere to hide. Bombs fell from the sky like rain, and torpedoes cut through the water like silver snakes. A massive explosion tore through the Kiyosumi Maru, a transport ship carrying ammunition. It vanished in a blinding flash, metal, fire, and human screams erupting into the air as the ship broke apart. Nearby, the cruiser Nagara was hit amidships, its decks erupted, flames swallowing men in seconds. In the chaos, a group of Japanese sailors dove into the water, their uniforms catching fire before the ocean could cool them. Some swam desperately toward the reefs. Others simply floated, lifeless, as burning oil spread across the surface. From the American bombers above, it looked like the sea itself was burning. The turquoise lagoon turned black with smoke and orange with fire. The pilots could smell it: fuel, metal, salt, and death. Back on the carriers, commanders watched through binoculars. The destruction below was staggering, but the operation had only just begun. As the first wave returned to refuel, a second was already being prepared. There would be no rest, not for the Americans, not for the Japanese, and not for the sea that was swallowing everything beneath it. By noon, the entire lagoon was chaos. Ships collided trying to escape. Radio calls turned into screams for help. The Eikoku Maru, loaded with troops and explosives, took a direct hit from a dive bomber. The explosion that followed was so massive it shook the entire lagoon. A mushroom cloud of fire rose hundreds of feet high. The blast was visible miles away, and when the smoke cleared, the ship was gone. Nothing left but burning debris and a patch of boiling sea. For many Japanese sailors, there was nowhere to go. Some tried to escape in small boats. Others hid inside their sinking ships, writing quick notes, prayers, and final words on scraps of paper before the water rushed in. They knew they would not see the sun again. And still, the attack continued. Every few minutes, another explosion echoed across the lagoon. The Shinkoku Maru, Fujikawa Maru, Hoyo Maru, one by one, the names disappeared beneath the water. What was once Japan's proud fleet was turning into a graveyard. As night began to fall, the horizon glowed red. The sea reflected the flames like a mirror of hell. Even from miles away, American sailors on the outer ships could see it. The burning lagoon, the rising smoke, and the orange flicker that looked like the end of the world. Aboard the carrier Enterprise, pilots returned in silence. Some were shaking, some were crying. They had seen things that would never leave them. Men jumping from ships engulfed in fire, explosions lighting the water like lightning, and bodies floating among wreckage that just hours earlier had been alive and moving. Radio reports confirmed the devastation, dozens of ships sunk, hundreds of planes destroyed. But Admiral Spruance wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure Truk could never be used again. Through the night, destroyers crept closer, launching torpedoes at anything that still moved. Flames still raged on the horizon. The water hissed as burning oil spread farther and farther. By midnight, the sea was glowing, not from the moonlight, but from fire. The once peaceful lagoon, where islanders had fished and swum for generations, was now filled with the wreckage of war. The cries had stopped. All that remained was the crackle of flame, and the steady, endless sound of waves hitting metal. Somewhere in the darkness, a Japanese sailor clung to a floating plank of wood. The heat scorched his face, his eyes fixed on the burning horizon where his ship had once been. He whispered his commander's name, and then quietly, he slipped beneath the waves, joining the hundreds who would never surface again. The night sky over Truk was thick with smoke. Stars were hidden. The air smelled of oil and death. And far away, on the decks of the American carriers, men stood in silence, watching the inferno. Even in victory, they felt something heavy, because beneath that fire, they knew thousands of souls had just been lost to the sea. When morning came, the smoke still hung over the lagoon like a shroud. The sun rose red, its light reflecting on oil-slick water that looked like blood. The Americans prepared for the second day of attacks, and as engines roared once again, the ghosts of the night still lingered below the surface, waiting for the next wave of fire that was yet to come. The sound of aircraft engines build slowly, waves crash faintly in the background. February 17, 1944. The sun had barely risen when the silence above the Pacific was shattered. It was a sound that would change history, the beginning of Operation Hailstone. On the decks of American aircraft carriers, dozens of bombers and fighters stood ready. Pilots tightened their helmets, exchanged brief glances, some smiled, but in their eyes lived only two things, fear and duty. The commander's voice came through the radio, calm but firm, "Go." And then, the sky exploded with sound. One after another, the planes lifted off, their propellers screaming through the humid air. The roar of engines echoed across the endless sea. Down below, on the Japanese base at Truk Lagoon, the soldiers still didn't know what was coming. Some were sipping morning tea, others were checking ship equipment, believing it was just another quiet day in paradise. The first bomb fell like a whisper from the heavens, and then, the island shook. A thunderous explosion tore through the calm morning air. In seconds, peace was gone, replaced by fire, smoke, and screams. American dive bombers plunged toward their targets, raining steel and destruction. Japanese anti-aircraft guns opened fire, lighting the sky with streaks of flame. A few American planes were hit, crashing into the sea, but the attack didn't stop. Japanese warships burst into flames. Oil slicks on the water ignited, turning the lagoon into a floating inferno. The smoke was so thick that daylight turned to night. Officers shouted orders, "Put out the fire, save the ship," but there was too much fire, and too little hope. The pilots above didn't cheer. They just flew on in silence, watching the hell they had unleashed below. They knew, what burned beneath them were not just ships, but men. For 11 straight hours, the sky rained fire over Truk Lagoon. By the time the sun began to set, the once beautiful waters of the Pacific were burning red, filled with oil, debris, and the ghosts of war.